Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back, everybody. What's it like to be a published author? We're going to explore that today and look at it from both sides, the publisher side and the author side. And these are very, very different books. On a biographical level, involves this gentleman's family and a lot more. Let's dig into that. Let's start with the publisher from NFB Publishing. Mark Pogodzinski is back with us. How are you doing today?
Good. How you doing, Steve?
Really good. Really good. Looking forward to digging into these books, and that's courtesy of who do we have here today with us?
So we have Martin Halmasser, who wrote two biographies of important men in his life, men who sacrificed and fought in World War II. And I think the biography of, not to like simplify it, but like a common person, like someone who's not famous, has a great deal to offer a reader. You learn a lot about what it means to raise a family, to sacrifice for your country, and to lead a decent moral life. And I think sometimes we need more of that than we get. And that's what Martin gives us with his two books.
Well, what I get from these books and your intro to him is that we're all heroes in some. I feel we're all warriors. We've been through a lot, in our lives, and it's illustrated a lot in this book and how these gentlemen have helped others. Martin, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
I'd like to start with Ott's River, and that is a book about who in your life?
That is my father-in-law, a man named Otto Strobel. The German name.
And this takes a look at his journey through his path of life, essentially in World War II, right?
Yeah, and just his resilience and persistence, that greatest generation that everyone talks about. He's a model of that. I didn't know him for a long time, but in the short time that I did, boy, did I have some respect for him and what he did in World War II. And I can get into those details. But it just, I wanted to tell the story for my own family, but thank you, Mark, for your comments. I'm hoping others can get the same out of it. It's these, both my dad and my father-in-law, just good, hardworking, honest guys that did things that I could never imagine doing myself. My dad in a B-17 being shot at by the Germans, my father-in-law jumping out of an airplane in the jungles in the Philippines. So, it's just, and I got a few years on you guys. I'm that generation that can tell these stories, and I want to get them out there while I can.
It's almost like a forgotten era in 2026, because people look back and, how many decades back there? Tell us about some of the things that you learned that your father-in-law did.
So, as I said, I knew him for about 4 years before he passed, and my wife and I weren't married. Just where he was in the Philippines. In the book, I talk about finding a map that he had. Esso published them probably right after the war, where the troops had fought, and he drew a line from San Francisco, where he departed on a troop ship, to New Guinea, where he went down in a plane that caught on fire and he got burned, and he went right back to it, and then all the way into Leyte and Luzon, some very major battles in the Philippines, and then on to Tokyo. Now, in the research I did for this book, they always say the Marines are the first in. Well, the 11th Airborne paratroopers like to say they were the first in, and they were guarding the docks around the Missouri while MacArthur and others were accepting the Japanese surrender. It's fascinating to me that here's this young country boy, quite frankly, in living this history. And so I didn't know a lot about that when I knew him, especially. And if I had, boy, would I have asked more questions. And I regret that a little bit.
How do you think he was wired? You look at him, and he was burned in one situation, going back for more. then back for more. What kept him going? What do you think?
I read a little bit about, when he went down in this plane and caught fire, he was in the hospital for almost a month. And his buddies came and visited him and signed this little parachute, which I have in my office, and it's
Wow.
a wonderful keepsake. And it was his camaraderie with those guys. This had to be the greatest adventure of his life. And you talk about, these guys were brothers, right? Like band of brothers. And he just wanted to get back into the fight. I mean, he just, it was a different time, right? And that was very gung ho. Guys were just, and my dad included, it was just, that's what you did. In fact, so obviously Buffalo near Niagara Falls, the induction center out of this area was Niagara Falls and what they called Fort Niagara. And there's a pretty good chance that my dad and my father-in-law were there at the same time because they had entered the service at the same. So both of these stories were just kind of shouting at me to write them. I mean, I'm a writer by trade. I mean, I was in marketing, advertising, PR. So this was my first like attempt at a book. And I'll tell you, it wasn't easy, but boy, it was interesting to do. And I hope to do more.
I was going to ask you that, these two books, the first time you've written. So you've already, about writing copy and things like that, you were comfortable expressing thoughts that you had. Translate that now to writing books, and especially personal books. How did that feel? Did you almost have a fear in doing that?
You always have a fear of throwing yourself out there, right? You're open, but as a writer, you got to have thick skin. You got to take the criticism. But the personal part of it, what you mentioned, is really what was different. And especially with my dad's story, and it's my mom's story as well. I found myself with tears in my eyes as I was writing, and that was like, that never happened to me before. So that was real personal. And even with Otts River, this is my children's grandfather, and they didn't know him, but my wife and I have really told them about him, and so they know Grandpa Otto as if they grew up with him, and that's great, and that's what I want to have. And I just had the great fortune of having my first grandchild back in September, and my son and his wife, they named him Arthur after my father. I couldn't have been more joyful. It's just, so I want, like, now Arthur's in the world again. I want him to know his grandfather, and I'm not a warmonger by any means. It's just so happens to be the subject of both of these guys, but I've got this unbelievable respect for what I have a beautiful life because of both of them. My father raising me and my father-in-law having my wife, that just, it's just a gift. So I hope I paid enough tribute to them.
I can't imagine having a book in my hands that tells the story of my father and my grandfather. I would read that every night, and I'm not even kidding. I would. It's just like,
yeah, it's and I feel like I've only scratched the surface on family history. My dad was good enough to have, a computer back in the 80s and the 90s and had a family tree thing going, so I can tell where we came. Same with my wife's family. One of her aunts kept great family records, so I kind of, I knew where they were from. Like her family, the Strobels, came to Cohocton, New York, which is south of Rochester, about an hour, in 1830. They came in 1830. Like, wow. So there's probably lots of good stories there too.
Isn't it amazing? You look back, all the stuff that we complain about here, and then you look at these people from other generations getting on a boat, and they could be a teenager, it could be a child by themselves, and made it over to the U.S. and then started a life and then started a family. Like, talk about having some backbone, and then the rest of us are complaining. Well, it's cold out.
I can't get on the internet. Oh yeah,
my internet's down today. I can't believe I can't get online. Yeah, it's just it really puts it into perspective. Tell us about Tailwinds. That's a book about your dad, right?
Yeah. So that was begging to be written too, because I have all of my mom and dad's letters that they exchanged during World War II. So they both went to school in Buffalo and were not engaged, but after high school, they were dating. And my father was drafted in 1942, and that's when the letters began. So there's like 500 letters, and I went through every one of them. And talk about emotional and personal. That's where I learned a lot about my dad and what he did, um, and where he was. And then I could, research that and find out more about different battles. And he like classic World War II never talked about it. And so these letters really brought it out. Like, wow, my dad, he was this skinny little guy, but he was a badass. I mean, they were flying these missions. He did 30 missions over German targets as a radio operator gunner. And part of his story in these letters was so beautiful. He tried to be a pilot and he washed out. He tried to be a navigator and he washed out. And he'd write these letters to my mom saying, "Oh, I hope you're not disappointed in me." And
Wow.
just a humble guy. So there's a religious aspect to the story as well. And I'll just touch on it briefly. I grew up Catholic. My father grew up Catholic. And while he's over in Italy, that's where he's stationed, um, his father back in Buffalo, New York, gets hit by a car and dies. And he's 20 years old, 21. So the chaplain of the base kind of takes him out on a Jeep and says, "Hey, son, um, uh, your dad was hit by a car. I'm sorry he's dead, but you can't go home." And just that, to me, I sort of opened the book with that story because it's like, wow. And then my father had done like 2 or 3 missions by that point. So he knew what he was facing after his father died. Well, this priest realizes, well, this guy's Catholic. I'm going to kind of put him under my wing and takes him to see an Italian priest named Padre Pio. And Padre Pio is currently a saint in the Catholic Church. Um, my dad talked about him a little bit, but it was another thing that got him through the war. And what I found from these letters, I have the original letter that he sent to my mom saying, "I met this Italian priest who has the marks of Christ, the stigmata, and is known to perform miracles." And it's like, I'll never forget that experience. Reading more letters, turns out he went and saw Padre Pio multiple times. And I have photos of him, Padre Pio, playing the organ that I had no idea he was a keyboardist. And it was just fascinating to me. So my mom, his faith in this Padre Pio and just, wanting to get back home were the tailwinds, if you will. Maybe a little corny, but it just seemed like he had a lot of things pushing him forward. And it's that resilience that I spoke about with my father-in-law. You just did it. You went. You didn't, so it was, just learning a lot about both of these gentlemen. And like you were saying, we complain about the temperature or whatever. I still complain, but I'm trying a lot harder not to.
It kind of puts it into perspective. Did you always have, Martin, an affinity or an interest in World War II and around that period?
No, to be honest with you, it wasn't until I got older and had access to my mom and dad had all these letters and we knew they were somewhere and they both passed. And when we were selling their house, we couldn't find those letters and we knew they were somewhere. And I have no idea why, but my father stuck them up in some ceiling tiles in the basement. And fortunately we found them. So that really sparked an interest. And, during, I should take that back a little bit. When my father was alive and I was younger, we went to air shows all the time. In Geneseo, they always had an annual air show, and it was awesome. And they always had B-17s. And my father would try to show us how you have to pull yourself up. And it's like, no, we're going to take a ladder to get in this time. And we would go through the planes, and he would just point out all this stuff. And he'd get to his radio station and explain where, and there'd be people crowding around to listen to him. because it was historic, and he would just walk around the plane and point things out and tell stories. So I had some of that growing up, if you will, and the combination of the letters and those stories, it just was something that, as I say, just I felt like it's got to be written.
Thank goodness you found the letters. Could you imagine? Time
No,
goes on, and
no, and
uh,
I protect them with my life, but I've begun scanning them as a bit of a chore, but I've begun to do that and really back them up and whatnot. Somehow, I come from a family of seven. I'm six of seven. Somehow I ended up with all the photos and the letters, and I'm glad to be the historian. It's very interesting.
I can't even imagine, Mark, you getting these books or the manuscripts or the starting point of these, and because it's factual, it's personal, it's biographical. What did it look like for you when Martin gave you each of these books?
Well, I think you hit the point there. You want to make sure you have a proper balance before for the historical accuracy, but you don't want to lose the emotion of the story itself. And so I want to make sure that those are an even balance, or where the emotion becomes more prevalent, you want to emphasize that and enhance it. And with Martin, with the images that he gave, we were able to include them in the chapters, and I think that enhances it because it gives you something to look at. It gives you a visual reference. And I think the books themselves, they're about these seemingly ordinary men who have done extraordinary things. Um, they've lived through a historical moment, and I think we're losing that as we get further and further away from it.
Mm.
And we see documentaries, we'll see a Hollywood movie, and it becomes very grandiose. But these books show what it was like, show what an individual went through, how they survived, what they relied upon, whether it was their faith, whether it was someone waiting for them at home, and it makes it personal. It takes that historical moment and makes it something that someone can relate to in their own lives. Like we talk about like whatever we went through, and he talks about the finding the letters in the ceiling tiles. My grandfather fought in World War II. We had no idea what he did. And eventually he found out that he had received multiple Purple Hearts, and that a scar on his hip, which he never told us about, was from a bayonet. But he
Wow.
also kept his letters randomly in the ceiling tiles in his basement. And by happenstance, you're looking around, you're trying to find something for him, like, what are these? And then you pull them down, and then they're all the handwritten letters between him and he and my grandmother. And so I feel that a lot of us might have missed that, especially as the generations get younger. And with Martin's books, I always recommend them to younger readers.
Mm.
Like you've seen movies or documentaries on World War II, you know of it, hopefully, the concept of what it was. These are books of men who fought, and not just the men, but like the wives and their families. And with Martin's books, it's after the war, especially with Ott's River. I found most intriguing of what he did after. How do you go from the culmination of almost human history in World War II to, in Otto's case, selling cars? And how do you transition that? And that made me think of my grandfather. It made me think of all those men who did that, who came back from that war and went back to a normal life. And I think you both said it. It gives us perspective on our own lives, even now, 80 years later.
I'm thinking here with what we're talking about, especially what you just said, Mark. It may have been more challenging to come back to civilian life than the war itself in some regards because of everything you experienced. Now you have to suppress it, minimalize it, and do life and support a family. I can't imagine the challenges there. And even with these books, even growing up, I loved reading comic books about war. Sergeant Rock was one of my favorites. I'd sit in my aunt's hammock and I'd be reading those books, and I'd watch movies. But I don't know if it's accurate. This is accurate. It probably doesn't get any more accurate. Martin, what was your biggest challenge in writing either of these books?
Finding time, to be honest with you, because I didn't want to, and and real quick, a shout out to Mark and NFB, wonderful publisher, makes it so easy. It gave me that opportunity and opened this door. Okay, so now I got to produce, okay, now we've got, but time, I'm finally, I'll say I'm retired. Um, if any of my clients are listening, now I'm retired, but I was working at the time of the first book, but then COVID hit. It gave me a lot of time, and I didn't want to do anything half-assed. Right? It's just um, I went to school. I went to Buff State in Buffalo for journalism, and back in the day, you everything was accurate and you attributed things, and it was old school journalism. And I wanted to approach these books like that, so that I'm not making things up. And my father, this probably comes from my father. He read all kinds of books, and he would read a World War II book and say, that's not accurate. I know, and so I wanted to be sure my father wasn't over my shoulder going, that's not accurate. Now, the challenge with Ott's River, I did not know, I didn't grow up with Ott, but I did have a lot of his army records. He has two Purple Hearts, one from the plane crash, and then another from having shrapnel in his head, in a battle. And so I had to make sure there's a lot of great books on the 11th Airborne Angels, and the general that led that division, his name was General Joseph Swing, was a roommate of Eisenhower's at West Point, so this guy's the real deal running the show. And then MacArthur, being the head of the Japanese theater, he's in the picture as well. So, this is well researched stuff. I don't want to come out and say something that's wrong. And maybe I'm a little too light on his military service, but it was, to your original question, that was a real challenge, making sure that I'm doing this right and gathering this information. And, for example, there's one of the famous stories of the 11th Airborne is they rescued prisoners of war, British and American nurses and religious people who the Japanese had in a place called Los Baños. They jumped in a surprise attack and saved these people from. Now, I know my father-in-law was there only from an aunt, his sister, who told the story. And I told this story in the book as well. Years later, he's living in Rochester, New York, and gets a knock on the door, and it's this nurse that he had met in freeing these prisoners. And she was in a little town maybe 20 miles outside of Rochester and tracked him down to say thank you. And I'm just, wow, we're talking no internet in the day. No, she tracked him down. I don't know how. And I just think that's fascinating. But what it gave me was, okay, he was there. My guess was, in researching this rescue, there were troops that came in with the transports and things to carry people out. He didn't jump in, but he was part of the transport to get people off the island and back to safety. But even that, it's just, so it was challenging to, I didn't want to get too deep into that because I didn't know how involved he was. So,
yeah, we look at celebrities nowadays, and even, 10, 20 years ago, put them on a pedestal. Yeah, they do some movies, maybe make some songs, whatever. These are the celebrities. This is or should be, in sacrificing their life and even in auto situations, jumping back in there again because of what they believe in. Fantastic books, Martin. Got to tell you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And your fixation with accuracy for your family and also for that time period is very admirable. Really cool.
I think we're losing some of that,
Yeah,
obviously.
And isn't that ironic? Because with all the technology, internet and all that, you think, all right, let's just preserve it. No, because we get sidetracked. I have to ask this question. It's completely unrelated to anything that we're talking about. But I'm looking at you and you got guitars in the background. What's going on there?
I'm a hobbyist, but I've got nice guitars that I probably don't deserve. But you're looking at, I don't know if you're looking at there's a Les Paul on the wall
Yeah.
that was given to me after my brother-in-law passed away. So that's got some special meaning to me. It's a beautiful guitar.
Wow.
My
And
sister
you play?
I'm a hobbyist. I've taken lessons. I enjoy playing. I can read music a little bit, and it's really for my own enjoyment. And just they make good wall decorations too.
I don't play a little bit, whatever, but I was doing the same thing where I come across a guitar here, a celeb signs it there or whatever. And I wind up giving them away to charity so they can make money off of them.
That's a good use. Yeah.
Yeah. Because if I played, I'd keep them, but you don't want to hear me play.
You're a young man. You can just keep going. That's what I tell
I'm way older than you think. Trust me on that one. Like when you're talking about, writing, I read the AP Writer's Handbook, Associated Press.
I got that in my office. It's an antique.
And I needed it because I was news and public service director of a pretty big radio station when I was 21.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So when you talk about the writing style, I got it. I totally get it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mark, best thing for somebody if they want to even pick your brain on writing a book, just go to the website.
Well, first, pick up Martin's books to find out how it's done correctly.
And they're on Amazon, by the way, just got to add.
They are on Amazon. There's Kindle editions. Go to the website, nfbpublishing.com. There's a small form to fill out, and that starts the process.
Fantastic. You're there to support in every way, right down to the marketing, right down to the covers. And I think I say this every time we get together, even on these books, the covers are fantastic. Like I feel like I'm connected to the book, and if I hadn't read a word, I feel like I've already read it just by looking at the covers. NFB.
Martin made the designs for these particular covers.
Well done.
A shout out real quick, if I may.
Sure.
My sister-in-law, Joyce, did the Otts River cover. This is her father-in-law as well. So there was another personal touch to the book. And I asked her, can you kind of just match the sort of nostalgic feel of Tailwinds? And she did an outstanding job. The first cover was done by a good friend of mine, John Chapanic, and I'll give them a shout out. Both talented artists.
Now that I'm looking at the cover, I see the sign on what would be a Fiat dealership.
Yeah,
I made the connection to selling cars after the war. Wow. Yep. Mark, Martin, thank you for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.